So today I'm joined by Kevin Grogan, who's phoning into us from the Big Apple. Could I ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself for anyone who hasn't come across you before?
Yeah, born in Dublin. Just grew up playing soccer or football on the streets. Obviously, it was a great time for football in Ireland back then. With 88 and 1994 with the national team doing well. And yeah, just really got into football and played for a local club and then moved on to Belvedere Football Club. And I went to Belvedere College as well. I know you did. Yeah, and eventually got signed by Alex Ferguson at 15 years of age. So I would have been training with Man United from 11 to 15, going on all my school holidays. And then at 15, signed full time.
That must have been absolutely mind-blowing experience, right?
Yeah, it was brilliant. It was a great opportunity, and like legally you weren't meant to sign till you're 16, but they found a loophole, and I never forget Manchester United coming over to Belvedere College, and talking to them and seeing if they could get me a year early and pretending it was work experience for fourth year. So my first year in Manchester United was quote unquote work experience, but it was just a
That
way of
must
them
be the
getting
best
me.
work experience in the world,
Yeah,
right? It's like if
yeah.
if Carlsberg did work experience.
Yeah, it was great.
Um,
It's just
uh,
it got me over a year early, which for them was important because the sooner you get into that kind of full time environment, the quicker you get a chance to develop.
how was the negotiation with your parents to leave Belvedere and go play for Man U?
Yeah, interesting. I don't remember everything that happened, but I think the general kind of gist of it was that I think they would have preferred me to stay and do my leaving cert naturally, but I think they were also understood that they couldn't stand in my way when obviously Manchester United and Alex Ferguson call and want to sign you. They couldn't say no to that because the reality is if you don't go at 15, 16, it's very hard to say that you're definitely going to go at 18 because lots can happen within them 2 years. You miss 2 vital years of development. So I'd say ideally they would have wanted me to stay, but also knew they had to let me go. So I think that was the gist of it.
It was a hard choice, but yeah, I guess when it's Manchester United, it seems maybe a bit more obvious. Um, if you're talking to parents now and they're struggling with the same decision, or if you're talking to young people, and maybe it's not as like cold cut as Manchester United, maybe it's another club that doesn't like their world on fire as much as Man U. What sort of advice do you have for people about making that decision?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, it's a great opportunity to go to England and play professional football and try and make it. And, you have to be pretty good to get to that level. But what people don't realize is the chances of then making it when you go over are really slim because you've got all these players you're competing against every day, your teammates who are all trying to get into the first team. But I mean, now that I'm older, looking back on this, you know, I'm not sure I'd want my kid to go through that. It's a tough, cutthroat world. And I think, I never got a proper education. I would, I regret it to some degree, but I've done okay for myself and I've gone on and done other things and figured things out. But I think, I look at my friends back home, my brothers and sisters, and they kind of went the conventional route of school, college, the work life and all that. And maybe that's a more stable kind of way of doing it from an emotional point of view and a mental standpoint. But I wouldn't change anything either. So because I got so many great experiences, but I found it hard. It's a tough, cutthroat life, and you're thrown into it at 15 years of age. It's tough. So I'm kind of on the fence with that one. But advice for people, I would say probably go and give it a chance. But if you can continue your education as you're doing it, which is hard to do both, but if you can, then that's a good thing as well. And just know that it's very hard to get signed, but it's even harder then to make it after that.
Right, right, right. So there's a lot of obstacles in the way. Why is it so hard to continue education when you're playing? Like in my head, maybe I'm naive, but in my head, you might be training 2 hours, you might be doing prep either side 2 or 3 hours. You still have a chunk of time, no?
Yeah. Yes and no. I mean, it depends on the person, but yes, you have the time to do it. There's no doubt about that. You've loads of time. But I think the reality of it is to make it as a professional athlete in any sport, once you go full time, I mean, the level of intensity in terms of, not just training, but like what you give to that craft to make it, like you're really putting your heart and soul into it. And it just consumes you 24/7. So even when you're not training, you're recovering, you're trying to eat the right food, you're thinking about it. And there's just so much that goes into that. I think from a mental standpoint, it's very hard. You've got to be so disciplined to be able to do that, switch off, study, switch back on. would have struggled with that 100%. But you definitely have the time to do it. But I think that's where the mentality comes in. And maybe things have changed a bit now. But, if you go in with the mentality of I'm going to give this a go, but this may not work and I need to have something to fall back on, and you really believe that, then I think you can do it. But for me, it was all or nothing. I was in, and it was just like, this is what I'm here to play football. I'm not here to do anything else. And I'm going to give this everything I have. And it consumes you, which is what's required, but also it's a dangerous place to be mentally as well.
Yeah, yeah. No, I can hear it now once you explain it. Yeah, how do you go into a high performance environment like one of the best in the world and then kind of think, well, I'll do this, but I'll also focus on my studies and education, especially if maybe the other lads are going off having a great time and playing golf or whatever it is, and you're saying, no, I'm going to go back to the books. That maybe it's possible, but maybe unrealistic for those couple of reasons. So when you went over, you were touching base with Alex Ferguson, right?
Yeah. So like from 11 to 15, as I said, I'd be on all my school holidays and you'd be training and trialing, and you'd see the first team and you'd interact with some people, but you'd be kind of away from the full-time setup. But the first day I went in at 15 full-time, you're in the training ground. Back then it was the Cliff training ground, legendary Cliff training ground, but you're in there. It's youth team, reserves, first team, all beside each other, same canteen, same weights room. So you're interacting with them every day, all day.
Very cool.
And you see Alex Ferguson all the time because he's there. Now, I always say that like from 11 to 15, the Alex Ferguson I had seen and knew was a very nice, engaging, polite person, because the times you see him are very calculated in terms of maybe he's coming to see your parents to try and get you to sign, or you're getting brought into his office to say you've done well. But when I got thrust into that full-time environment, you kind of saw the other side where he'd be, not all the time, but kind of storming down the corridor, shouting at someone or giving someone the hairdryer or whatever. So I was very innocent at 15, but I never forget the first day. I was only the first week I saw him lose his head and start screaming at someone. And I was like,
Oh, wow.
and he was cursing. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe this. But obviously, as you get a bit older, you just realize that's part of it,
So I was going to ask you, yeah, is because when you're going over, obviously everyone going there is technically amazing, right? The best of their group. So when you're going there and you're in that professional environment, what is the coaching? What is Alex Ferguson's role? Like, he's not doing the logistics, he's not doing operations. So when he's screaming at people, or you're like, how are they coaching you? They're not showing you how to kick footballs. They're not showing you how to
No, well, I think
defend,
like
right?
he was the master of bringing brilliant people in around him. Like, he had the best coaches around him, the best nutritionists, sports scientists, physios, you name it. He just brought the best people around him. He just pulled the strings. Now, I have to say, like, he wasn't ranting and raving every day. Don't get me wrong. Like, he was way smarter than that, and to be as successful as he was, but he wasn't afraid to let you have it either. But he was brilliant. Like, I mean, you'd bump into him in the corridor sometimes, and he'd say, come into my office anytime you want. If there's any issues, are you okay in the digs? Are you settling in okay? And all that stuff. So he was brilliant in that regard. But his coaches were brilliant. I mean, at the youth level at that time, the famous Eric Harrison was the coach. And Eric Harrison is like considered one of the greatest youth coaches of all time. Like, he was the reason Beckham, Giggs, Scholes, Buss, Neville's, all those players, even going back to Mark Hughes, Norman Whiteside, he was the reason they all came through the system. So I was blessed because I had him for my first year, and then he ended up retiring. But he was just brilliant, and he was like a mini Alex Ferguson. But I mean, obviously, at that level, you're all good at football, but it was just the ability for them to teach you. Like, the motto was always basics better than anyone else. And then people get caught up, like the world of soccer is very different now. And people talk about tactics all the time, which are really important, don't get me wrong. But in terms of youth development, you have to have the basics down, and they drilled that into you. And the value of work ethic was so important. And the value of having the courage to get on the ball. Like, people talk about having courage to tackle someone. And yes, you need courage to do that. But it was drilled into us to have the courage to get on the ball. A lot of players hide on the field because they're afraid to get on it, because they're afraid to lose it. At Manchester United, it was like, if you didn't get on the ball or shout or scream for the ball, they take you off. So we learned over time that we had to get on the ball. We had to express ourselves. And obviously the foundation was always hard work, and concentration levels was a word that was used every single day. So it was all these so-called basics that were drilled into us that enabled us to kind of become a really good player. Obviously, we had the natural ability. So it was interesting because now the game has changed a lot now. And I think sometimes people lose sight of the basics, particularly at youth level.
It's bizarre, right? Because you would expect anyone going to Manchester United is going to be screaming for the ball, and they're trying to show off their talents and skills as much as possible. But I suppose there's still that fear that they're going to make a mistake, and that's going to be worse than pretending that
Yeah, well, there's
that
different
you weren't
levels.
able
There's
to get it.
different levels to that as well. And like obviously at Manchester United, the expectation is much higher. And you've got to remember, like when you're going to Manchester United, you're coming as probably one of the best players in your previous team. Probably. I mean, I was at Belvedere Football Club in Fairview. We had Wes Hoolahan and Declan Field. These are phenomenal players, but you would be considered one of the better players on that team. When you go to Manchester United, suddenly you're not the best player because you have all these players in your age group. You have all these players in the age group ahead of you in the reserve team and in the first team. So suddenly, like the dynamics change, and so it's total different psychology behind that.
Yeah, it can also, I guess the confidence can be an issue then, right? Because you go from being the best to being just the new guy, and maybe you have to earn your stripes all over again, right? And it can be an intimidating if Ferguson's walking in the corridor and he's having to go at somebody, or even just his presence would be intimidating
But
for young
I've been
lads.
in like simple, even when I trained with the first team, like you'd be in a simple exercise that you would do the most basic exercise ever, say a passing drill. And if Alex Ferguson's standing there, like 5 yards away from you, looking at you do that, you'd be amazed the pressure that puts you under. And you'd be amazed how the body reacts to that.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
bizarre thing, but that's all part of the process of learning. And, as you climb the ladder and, ultimately, if you make it, you have to be able to play in front of 50,000+ fans. So, but yeah, him standing there watching you is can be quite nerve-wracking.
What would you say was your favorite moment, or your proudest moment as a professional player?
But two things stand out for me. I mean, the first time I ever went on trial with Manchester United, they would bring all the best players from Europe. All the scouts would come in and bring their players in, and I'd done particularly well. And I was only 11, and I got brought into Alex Ferguson's office. But the fact that he knew who I was, he knew my name, he knew I'd done really well. And not everyone got brought into his office. Maybe one or two players did. And he just said, if you keep training hard and doing well, there's a good chance we'll want to sign you in a few years. So that was an amazing feeling. But I'd say that the biggest achievement was definitely winning the European Championship with Ireland. So we won that in 1998, and would have been John O'Shea, Andy Reid, Liam Miller, who sadly passed away now. We had such a phenomenal team. And the 18s won it the same year. That would have been Damien Duff and Robbie Keane and all those, Richard Dunn. So like that was a great time for people forget that, like, because we're not doing great at the moment if we're being honest, but we won back-to-back European Championships in 1998, U16 and U18. That's a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
So I was part of that, and that was a real proud moment. And we Brian Kerr and Noel O'Reilly as our coaches, and yeah, it was a brilliant time. So that's the highlight.
Phenomenal success, right? Yeah, especially back to back. So we must have had a super strong talent development pathway there. What do you think we were doing particularly well at that time?
Yeah, I mean, there's a million things, but I think a couple of things. One, Brian Kerr and Noel O'Reilly, they're like you, and it's such a shame that Brian hasn't been involved in the FAI. I mean, since he had the first team job, and he didn't get his contract renewed, and I know there was a bit of tension there between him and John Delaney. But like for Brian Kerr not to be involved in Irish youth soccer is mind blown, really. But what he was able to bring to the table, and Vincent Butler was the U15 Ireland coach, and he was very good at making sure no one slipped through the net. So Vincent was notorious for doing trials upon trials upon trials, and he'd make sure all the best players were in the U15s or thereabouts. And then when we got pushed up to U16s with Brian and Noel, they were just the masters of developing and getting the best out of people. And yeah, so that was a massive part of it. The other thing, which is a whole different kind of discussion, but like when I grew up, we played street football. We were on the street playing, like everyone was. And the value of that in terms of developing your technical ability is really, really important. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist really anymore, not just in America here. Probably never existed in America. Maybe in some little pockets over the years it has. But I don't think it exists as much in Europe anymore. And if you're not playing every day in the street, you're not touching the ball enough, your technical ability isn't as good as it should be. And that's a big issue. But we all did that back then. Like if you talk to
Yeah.
every player in both of those squads, they would have grown up playing on the streets. So that helps massively.
So that grassroots and every day, those little touches make a big difference when it comes to the big
Yeah,
stage.
all them games,
Uh,
playing curbs and playing
yeah,
World
yeah,
Cup and all them games. I was at a dinner the other night with a very, very well-known, successful Irish businessman, and he loves football, and he was part of, Cherry Orchard, growing up and coaching and all that. And, we just talked about it. He was talking about playing curbs, and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
playing World Cup and all these things. And it's true. It doesn't exist now. We understand safety is an issue, and parents not letting kids just go out in the streets anymore like they used to, but there's definitely ways around it. I mean, there can be organised street football, if we really put our heads together. But that's a big issue, big issue.
Well, the organised street football is a great idea, right? Because it just takes down some of the barriers of the parents having to put kids in the car and bring them somewhere, or other sort of obstacles like money or time or anything
Yeah.
else like that. But it could be a simple thing to improve the technical ability of the kids. Can I ask you, your football career was a couple of years, and then what happened? It was cut short.
Yeah, I got some really bad injury. Well, the main injury was a pelvis injury. So I had a bony erosion on the pelvis and an avulsion where the tendons were ripped off part of the bone. But, times were different back then. It was like late 90s, and kind of had been sent around to many different specialists and surgeons, had some operations, and, had a ton of injections. But injections are masking the pain and not solving the problem. And just made a ton of comebacks and, gave it everything I had, but ultimately at the end of the day, it wasn't meant to be. And maybe if I was playing now and started now, the sports science is a lot more advanced, but back then it wasn't. And by the time they kind of caught what was wrong with me, it was probably too late. And many comeback attempts.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it must have been a tough blow. How did you deal with it? Because you were quite young at the time, right?
Yeah, it was tough. I mean, being in the treatment room was the worst. Like, you talk about being home and homesick and all that, which is a real thing. And especially back then, like moving to England was a big deal. And the world's a lot smaller now. But, if you're out training every day and you're playing on the weekend, you're pulling on the jersey, then, it's good. You feel good. It's great. But if you're over there and sitting in a treatment room, it's very tough. So I found that really hard, and that made it a big struggle. But when all was said and done, I just struggled with it. I moved back to Ireland. You don't have an education. Your self-esteem is low because, you left as this kind of the soccer player. You come back as nobody. The phone doesn't ring. You don't know what you're going to do career-wise. And you get lost. You get really lost. And definitely struggled mentally with all that. And that was a tough time.
Super, super tough moments. Don't worry, we don't want you to go back and relive that in this conversation, but it's just interesting to know what the transition was like. I heard a radio interview where they were talking about professional football players who they're even like in the full swing without injuries, but there's a gap in their contract for a year. And they were talking about, the mental challenges of, maybe you're not necessarily in the WhatsApp group because you're not at training. The money's not coming in, so you're kind of sitting at home. And even they said, like, even without the injury, it can be a tough sort of process if you're, if you find yourself a little bit isolated or not in the training ground every day and waiting for that contract or that phone call to come in. Did you get any support when you're going through that transition? Like, did anyone from the club say, sit with someone?
Times were different then. They were just a bit different. I mean, there was one or two people maybe in the FEI that tried to help, but not really, to be honest. And ultimately, you are a piece of meat at the end of the day, and your value is when you're on the field playing. And
Cool.
I would hope that times have changed and the welfare of younger players is better now. But I wouldn't say I had much support, to be honest. I mean, but then you look at things like, roll the clock forward when eventually I decided to move to America, and getting a visa is very hard. And Alex Ferguson wrote a reference for me directly to the embassy to get me my first O1 visa. So, Manchester United were brilliant in that regard. And I know Dave Bushell, who was the youth development officer, helped me get that. So, like, they did nothing wrong, but it was just a different time. And, they were there and they definitely helped in that regard. But I just think, particularly back home with the FAI, I just felt, a couple of years previous, you're winning the European Championship and the FAI officials are celebrating that, look what we did, we won the European Championship. And then roll the clock forward a couple of years, and one of those players is back home, and the phone doesn't ring, and there's not really a support system. So it is what it is. Like, I mean, I don't look back. I'm not bitter about it, but I wouldn't say it was one of my parents. Obviously, great people, and they didn't understand what was going on. And you've some people saying, well, it didn't work out, but it's only football, and whatever. And it's easy to say that, but it's all relative, really, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, everyone's doing their best, but they're not necessarily thinking of it from your perspective, right? They're
There
just
was no
thinking,
badness in any. Yeah, no
he'll figure
badness
it
in
out.
any of it. Yeah.
Yeah, they're probably thinking he'll figure it out, and it'll take him a few months, but it'll be okay. Meanwhile, you're kind of going, who am I? I was a football player. Now who am I? So can I ask you, what did you do after that? How did you get yourself into the next stage?
Yeah, well, I was back in Ireland. I was doing bits and pieces. I did some radio commentary, and Pat Devlin, who was an agent, took me under his wing a bit, and I went into that industry, which was brilliant opportunity. And Pat looked after me really well. Pat Devlin kind of created a job for me, to be honest. And but I was probably a bit young at the time to really understand that industry. But yeah, I just knew. I eventually got to the stage where I was like, I'm pretty miserable. I'm not enjoying living in Ireland. I don't really see any opportunities here. I need to do something different. And yeah, I just said, I'm going to move to America. And that's kind of where it all started. And here I am 14 years later.
So you got back involved in soccer in America, right?
Yeah, I came over, and initially was kind of, you do what you kind of, the easiest thing to do after you play is be a coach, and so I started the coaching circuit, and I remember telling someone last week I was a horrendous coach when I first started. I had great knowledge, but I didn't know how to coach. And I remember coaching a couple of sessions I did down in Pennsylvania, and I just realized how bad I was, which I'm thankful that I had the self-awareness to realize that. And I said, well, I have knowledge, I can be good, but I'm not good at the moment. So I went and educated myself on how to be good, and talk to people and watch videos, and got some coaching licenses and practiced, and I became a decent coach, and nothing crazy, but I was decent. And then I kind of got into the management side of things, and I managed Lansdowne Boys here, one of the biggest kind of semi-pro teams in America, and that gave me a lot of confidence, and but then I realized after a while, business was where I wanted to be at, the business side of sport, and I started slowly but surely edging into that kind of area, and yeah, thankfully it's really worked out.
Fantastic. So can you tell us about the business side of sport?
Yeah, so I suppose the first kind of break, I own a sports consultancy company, and primarily in football, but I've done stuff with Leinster Rugby and other kind of different brands in different sports, but primarily football. But the first kind of break was, and it shows you the power and the value of networking, because I was good at that without knowing I was good at that. Now I know I'm good at it, but I was always good at meeting people and following up and being polite and saying please and thank you, and just doing the right thing. And through a contact of mine, they knew someone that knew David Villa and David Villa's agent, Victor Onate. So obviously David Villa won the World Cup with Spain and played for Barcelona. He was coming to America to NYCFC, but he owned a company called DV7 with Victor, and they were trying to penetrate the market here on the soccer camp side and also on commercial activities. So they had reached out to me because I was the guy based in New York, and I built up a great relationship with them and helped them a lot. And that was the first, and they paid me, a monthly consultancy fee. And that was the first kind of indication that, okay, there might be some business in this, and I enjoy it. And I did a good job for them. And then a kind of great story. When I'd first come over, I was asked by Metro Soccer to coach this team, and it was a strange one because it was to coach them for 6 weeks to play one game. That was the job. And it was like a high school team, but it was high school kids from all over the world. And so I did it, and it was great. And we coached them for 6 weeks, and we played the game, and it was great. But there was one player on there, a Japanese player, and lovely guy. He was a good player. He had good technical ability. Probably wasn't maybe as physical as the other players, but like all the players, I treated them the right way, and I tried to educate them as much as possible. But that was that. That happened like 14 years ago, and that was the end of that project. But roll the clock forward like 6 years later, that guy, his name was Hiro, he'd reached out to me, and he'd gone and got his degree in America. He'd moved back to Japan, and he was then working for Mikitani, who's one of the most successful business guys in the world. Mikitani would own Lyft, which is like Uber. He owns Viber, which is like WhatsApp, and he owns Rakuten, which is like the Japanese Amazon. Like he's right up. He's right up there. He's one of the richest guys in the world. So he was working for his company, Rakuten, and but Mikitani is a massive soccer fan, and he had bought Vissel Kobe, which is a famous club in Japan. And his favorite player of all time was Andreas Iniesta, who again played for Barcelona and won the World Cup. And he said, I'm going to sign Andreas Iniesta. And everyone laughed at him. But 2 weeks later, he had signed Andreas Iniesta, like, because the power he had of persuading people, and obviously had the money to back it up. But Hero had reached out to me and sent me a lovely email, said, I'm not sure if you remember me, but you coached me all them years ago. And I'll never forget how you treated me and how much I learned about football, how much I learned about life and working hard and treating people with respect. And he'd remembered that. He said, I'm going to be in New York in a couple of weeks. Will you meet me? And I said, yeah, of course I will. And he told me he's working for Mikitani. But because they'd signed Andreas Iniesta for his soccer club, Andreas Iniesta had a club called NSN, which was kind of similar to David Villa's company. So they were representing players, they're doing commercial activities, they're doing content creation, and they really wanted to penetrate the American market. So Hero had said, I want to put your name forward. I think you should be the guy because you're in New York. So that led me into eventually signing a contract with Andreas Iniesta, and I became his representative in New York. So I thought that was a lovely story of kind of, a relationship that started from me just coaching a random Japanese guy, and not that I was trying to impress him, but he was impressed with how I treated him. And it kind of came full circle. So, and then, soccer.com, which is one of the largest apparel companies in America, I became very good friends with the owner, and they needed someone in New York City. So I started working for them. Niall Quinn and his daughter Ash Quinn set up a company called Team Taka, which is a podcast for youth soccer clubs in America. So I kind of became a part owner, and I'm their guy on the ground here, and Signing Day Sports, an app to help kids get recruited. So it kind of just slowly but surely happened, and I figured it out as I went. I learned on the job, but I think, it started with network and trying to be a good person. We're not perfect, but trying to be a good person and not always going looking for stuff from people. But if you treat people right, it's the right thing to do, but you never know how that can come back and help you. So that was kind of the story.
Yeah. That is amazing. It's a testament to good networking and treating people right, building trust, and I suppose following up and looking after them, keeping that genuine relationship going. Who knew that you would be a superstar networker all these years later after your?
But one thing on that, like with say Hero, like I would have met Hero anyway because I used to coach him. And I wasn't looking for anything from that meeting. It was like, no, that's the right thing to do. There's a kid that I coached and he wants to meet me. And I still do that all the time. Obviously, we get busier and busier as you grow your business. But there's plenty of people that, like, one guy reached out to me recently that one of the clubs I used to be technical director in many years ago when I was still on the field. And, we're 7-8 years on now. And I met him for a coffee. There's nothing in that for me, but it might mean something for him, for me to meet him. And I'm involved now in a professional soccer club, Westchester Soccer Club, a new franchise that I part own, and I'm an advisor. And another kid that I used to coach is now working for us. So it's kind of full circle, and that gives me a great kick. It gives me a great kick when you can keep in touch with these people. But it comes from a good place, and if business comes from it, even better.
Yeah, it's amazing. It sounds like a very organic way of generating business. Like if you set out with a business plan to do what you've done, it would seem kind of difficult to see how all these opportunities would come to fruition. Like it's almost like if you force it, it doesn't work. Whereas when you just leave yourself open, but also like you put out the good energy and the good networking, then you've created this. So it seems like a degree and a master's degree all in one.
I'm not sure, but I mean, one great example is I believe in getting out there and network, and sometimes you don't want to do it because you're saying, do I really want to go into the city today and meet this guy or do this or whatever? But you got to get up and do it. And a great example of, I went in to meet someone, a football agent recently that I know, and he represents some big players, but he was going in and he was hanging out with a buddy of his who's a big business guy in a different industry, but very, very successful, owns a CEO of a big GC company. And I went in, and again, I wasn't looking for anything, but I networked, we had a good time. I got the opportunity to meet this CEO again. And now here we are, we're kind of, 3 or 4 months into it, and we get on very well. But he's been super generous to me in advice. He's been advising me now how to scale my company. And like this guy is so intelligent and smart, it's unbelievable. And even his advice has been amazing, but even just to be around him, and now he'll bring me into his circles and just to see how he acts and interacts with people in all different environments is the massive learning curve for me. And so I'm kind of blessed that I got the opportunity to meet him, and even more blessed that he's kind of taken the time out to help me. I didn't go out to meet him to get something from him, but that's just
Yeah,
the way
yeah.
it
No, I get
happened.
you.
And
Yeah.
now I hope there's a day. I'm not sure what he would ever need from me, but I hope there's a day where I can return the favor for him. So I find that it's good. It's a good thing to get out there now.
It's super great advice for anyone who's looking to develop their career, develop themselves, or develop their business. Get out there and meet people and do it with an open mind. And you're not looking to get something, just to have fun, build a relationship. So it's yeah, I love it. It's a great point. I wanted to ask you about being a representative. So they say you're the guy on the ground in New York, so we'll get you to be the representative. What does that mean?
Well, it depends on the business. Like all these people have companies and they're trying to sell or do different things. So it really depends on the individual. Like with David Villa, he was doing commercial deals. So maybe Horizon came to the table and wanted to do an advert with him. So I'd be the middleman in that and bring them together and then, help them in terms of what that would look like. And with Andreas Iniesta, he had a lot, his company does so many different things. They own a new soccer boot company called Capitan. They own a sneaker company called Macacus. They were doing content creation. So, and then companies were coming to me as well on the other side saying, well, I have this product that's a VIP social media platform and we're looking for like high-end sports stars to be on it. So then I say, well, I have one of my clients is Andreas Iniesta, so I can bring them together. So it all just depends on what they're trying to do and so on. So it kind of, I use my connections to fit what they're trying to do, basically. And
You're like the
I mean,
super connector.
yeah, I don't know, super connected, but yeah, that's kind of it. And but it's important at that level to put people in the right room with each other. Like you can't put Andreas Iniesta in the room with someone who's not capable of being in that meeting. So there's a lot of work that goes behind the scenes before you bring them together to make sure there's a real deal on the table and it's not just wasting people's time. That's very important as well. But yeah.
Yeah, so you have to figure out if it's a legitimate deal, if it's going to be of value, if it's on there, if it's on brand for Iniesta or for David Villa. Is there anything, or how do you think about it? How do you make sure that this is a good
Yeah, well,
deal
I
to
mean,
bring the?
they're kind of unique situations, but the other companies, like say Team Tacker is a great example with Niall Quinn and Ash Quinn, brilliant, brilliant, brilliant product because Jeff Shreves is involved from Sky Sports. So he'll interview like what we call the gold dust segment. So he'll interview like a superstar, Pep Guardiola or Gary Neville or whoever, and they'll talk about youth development. But then the technology allows the youth club to top and tail that podcast. And then we'll wrap it all around their colours and it becomes a closed in-house podcast for that youth club. So the middle bit is the same across America. But a big issue in America is like, you got to remember it's pay to play here. So like parents are paying $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a year to join a youth club. Like when I grew up, I paid Seagrange and then Belvedere and Fairview paid like £1 a week. And if you didn't have it, it wasn't a big deal. Here, it's a massive industry. But parents are always skeptical of, well, what are the club actually doing? Why am I paying all this money? The old school newsletter doesn't really work anymore because no one reads it. So this is a great concept of, well, we're going to do world-class content to educate you, a parent, and the kid and the club on youth development. But you top and tail it with your club news. So you can talk to your parents every week. So like that is a deal where I'd come in and strategically say, well, how can we penetrate the market? And then you'd look at, say, soccer.com. Soccer.com, the largest company in America that supplies youth soccer clubs their apparel through all the big brands. So they have access to millions and millions of players, thousands and thousands of clubs. So there's strategically would make sense to try and pair those companies up. And that was one of the first deals we did where Team Taka signed a deal with soccer.com as a partner. So now straight away they have access to 2,000 plus youth clubs. So things like that where I come in and strategically, make a plan and then obviously follow through and use my connections to make sure that deal happens. So that's kind of a lot of what I do.
Wow, fantastic. that is some high level deal making you're doing there. But also it strikes me as like America is a great place to do that because they're so good. Like America's so good at commercializing everything, right? Like I think it would be kind of hard to do these things if you were based in Dublin.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I had no opportunities when I was in Dublin, and there's no way I would have got to where I am now if I'd stayed in Dublin. No, it's just Ireland's just a smaller place. There might be more opportunities now. Dublin has changed a lot since I was there for the better, I think, with a lot of the big companies going over there and the different tax incentives. But yeah, America's. I can't imagine there's a better place in the world to network than America, and I've said it
Yeah.
before. Like very rarely would I reach out to someone or be connected with someone that wouldn't want to meet? And I'm talking about like some people, like real high end people, like that Paul, who I talked about earlier, who's the CEO of a massive global GC company. I mean, he took time out of his busy schedule to bring me into his office to sit down with me and give me advice. He's done that more than once, and he's brought me into his circle a bit. And like this guy is like one of the best in the world at what he does. And I find that amazing. I'm very blessed that like he gave me that time. But I think America is a great place to network, but you got to put yourself out there, and you've got to do it for the right reasons. You can't always go looking for something. You got to let it happen naturally and holistically. And if people give you advice, take it.
Yeah. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. I think that's one of the things people struggle with is they feel like if they're going to networking, they're like in sales mode and they're trying to sell themselves and they're trying to convince people and influence people. Whereas what you're saying is the opposite of that. You're trying to build a connection, you're trying to take advice, you're trying to listen, you're trying to be open. That sounds much nicer as well. Uh,
Yeah, you're playing the
it,
long game. And it's a lot of the time you're not even you're genuinely like for me anyway. Like I'm not looking for anything other than
yeah,
like if I'm talking to someone and they're a good person and you think you're a good person, well, isn't that great that you're having a great conversation? And if something comes of that, brilliant. Um, but it's also important to remember the people that help you. Like you can't forget those people. And I've been lucky; a lot of people have helped me over the years, and you hope that you can return the favor in some way. But yeah, you just got to be respectful of it.
did you ever think of becoming an agent for players?
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, that's what Pat Devlin was doing. He had Damien Duff, and I know he did some commercial stuff with Shay Given, and he brought me in when I first went back to Ireland. So I was working with him, and he was very generous. Brought me into a lot of kind of big meetings, and I learned a lot. I think I was a bit young at the time to understand that industry, and I was still mentally wasn't quite over the fact that I wasn't a player anymore. But I've had a lot of offers particularly in the last 2 years, from agency companies to kind of see would I be interested to get involved. When I was kind of doing all my on-field stuff here, I was actually scouting for Manchester United. So I would go around looking at all the academy players here, and I spotted a young 11-year-old that was playing with the New York Red Bulls that turned out to be Tyler Adams, who's the captain of America. Jack McGlynn, who I think should be playing for Ireland, but I think he's playing for America now. But he's
Okay.
Philly Union. What a quality player he was when I seen him, and still is. And actually, his brother Conor McGlynn, who's fantastic talent, we just signed him from my new club, Westchester Soccer Club. And so I think the reason I'm saying that is there's a lot of talent in America, and I think there's a lot of players that you could identify at a young age and help. So a lot of people have approached me about that. I'm not sure. It's something that I could do. Um, I'm not sure if I want to do it, but there's definitely something there if I wanted to do it. And
Yeah,
it's picking the right people and the right company to do it with.
yeah. I can imagine. Because you've got a couple of balls in the air already and trying to like keep all these things going, like between soccer.com and your own kind of consultancy as well. I guess if you go into scouting and recruiting players, it's a whole other kettle of fish, and maybe there's a lot of travel involved as well. Um, could I ask you about the podcast? You've got a podcast as well, is that right? The
Well,
hairdryer.
yeah, yeah. So it's funny. Great. Well, it's a good story actually. This because I wanted to get into the podcast world in some way. I didn't know how to do it. And one thing I just kind of learned over the years was, and I never used to be like this, is sometimes you just got to pull the plaster off and go and do it. And it's never going to be perfect. And we all go through, you kind of you put it off, you stress that it's not going to be good enough for in this case, the sound won't be good enough, or I don't know how to interview people or whatever. And eventually I just said, you know what, I'll do it. And, I would say it was kind of a low level podcast, but it was a chance for me to start understanding that world. And production wasn't great. Interviews, some of the guests were brilliant, and I was okay at interviewing them. But it served a purpose for, one, youth soccer clubs enjoyed it, and two, I learned a lot about the industry. And I always wanted to do it for it to hopefully lead to something bigger and better. And that's what it did, because it led to Team Taka. And Team Taka is Niall Quinn and Ash Quinn's, and now I'm a part owner. And now we have this world-class podcast. But when I was going into those conversations, I had a bit of knowledge, limited knowledge, but I had some knowledge because I'd kind of been through that myself. So I suppose the lesson there is, like, if you want to try something, don't be afraid. Like, just go out and do it. Like, and it wasn't perfect. And, I'm sure if I listened back to an episode today, I'd cringe probably, but I got out and I did it, and I figured it out. And that led into the kind of the Team Taka stuff, which is phenomenal product and podcast. And at least I wasn't going into that blind. I knew a bit about the industry. So, so I don't actually do it anymore, but it's it was a good learning curve.
It served its purpose. I think that's
100%,
for me, that's a great takeaway from our conversation, is that you're so good at putting yourself into the right situation. Getting to Man United, getting to the room with the with the top businessmen, or getting the podcast so that you can have this next conversation with Niall Quinn and Ash Quinn. So, like, getting yourself in the right situations, a super important piece, it seems.
Well, yeah, and you know what? And it sounds simple, but showing up is half the battle. Like, you got to show up. Like, and that sounds easy, but like, as I said, there's some people in town today that, like, I want to go and network with and just hang out with, and part of me is like, do I really want to go into the city today? But you have to go and do it. Like, and you gotta put yourself out there and show. Yeah, you got to show up, and that's part of it. And I've been very lucky. I've had some amazing people like Mike Moylan and Brendan Moylan, the owners of Soccer.com, and Vicente, and the people like this who've just really taken me under their wing and helped me. And these are very successful guys, and they've kind of seen the movie before. And obviously Paul from the company I was speaking about earlier, more recently, and just a lot of great people. I've been blessed in that sense. And for whatever reason, they want to try and help me. And you got to always, every day is a school day. You got to keep learning.
I love it. Good on you, Kevin. Can I ask you, this is going to be in the back of my head all day if I don't ask you, if you got an email or a phone call about helping out in the Irish camp, even though you're based in America, would you be tempted to take that sort of project and help out in some way? Or do you feel like your heart, your body, your soul and everything is firmly in the US?
In terms of the soccer team in Ireland?
In terms of the soccer team, let's say if there's...
well, I'm not sure they'd be calling me, but if they did call me, my heart and soul is in America. So, I've been offered a few things over the years, kind of outside of America and outside of New York. And, anything that would involve relocating, I'm not sure I would do it. But listen, Irish football is close to my heart. I love League of Ireland. I think League of Ireland has done great lately, and Shamrock Rovers and Pats, and all these legendary youth clubs like Belvedere and Cherry Orchard and Home Farm. And I know that things are different now because there's the academy system, which some people think is a good idea, some people think is a bad idea, but it's really affected those clubs, Cherry Orchard, Belvo. And I was just talking about that the other day. Like those clubs did such a fantastic job of developing and nurturing players. You've Keith Fahey and Andy Reid, Cherry Orchard, Parrott, Wes Houlihan, Belvedere, and the list goes on and on. It's harder for them now because their best players are going to the academy system, which is fine. There's pros on that as well. But listen, it's close to my heart, our Irish football. I'd love to help in some capacity. I'm not sure where I'd fit into that, but I think the biggest thing, I'm distant from it, but the FAI behind the scenes, I think that's something that needs to be looked at and sorted out. I'm sure they're doing some good things. You would hope they are. But there's a lot of successful business guys that are Irish that I'm sure would love to jump in and help. So maybe they should be reached out to and use their experience and knowledge.
I was going to say, do you think there's things that the American clubs are doing in terms of, let's say, getting sponsorship, getting business people involved, commercializing the sport that actually helps develop it. Because I mean, you know 100 times more things about football than I do, but it seems like American soccer is really growing leaps and bounds. Do you think there's any lessons we could take from that we could implement in Ireland?
There's always lessons. There's definitely there's good and bad over here, but there's always lessons to be learned. I think the product on the field, as I said, in League of Ireland is unbelievable. League of Ireland as an entity, or I mean, I think the FAI still run that, and could that be its own entity and spin away, kind of like the Premier League, and get some, real business guys behind it that can obviously help bring money to it, but can also use their expertise in terms of how to run it. I think that might be something to look at. But yeah, there's lots of good that happens. I mean, the MLS and USL, they're run as franchise models, so it's interesting how they do it, but it has allowed stability financially. There's no doubt about that. There's wage caps, and they've been very strict and stringent on how they run it, which it's been a long game, but they're starting to see the rewards now. I mean, the MLS is never been better. The USL League is growing all the time. USL won championship, and they're talking about bringing a third division in as well. So it's definitely grown a lot. Yeah. So yeah, I'm sure there's things that can be learned.
There's plenty of things that can be learned and done. Kevin, thank you for sharing your fountain of knowledge and your experience and your background. I loved hearing about your networking approach and how you built a career for yourself through the bumps in the road, and very, very successful. So I'm delighted for you, and I really appreciate you taking the time to chat to us today.
Appreciate it.
So enjoy the rest of your networking for the day. I'm sure you're off to some events.
All good. Thanks, Ronan. Appreciate it.